And it is 2 o'clock. Welcome to the panel on writing suspense. If you are expecting anything about mystery or ministries, we threw that out of the title a long time ago. We are going to be talking about how we go about writing suspense, a little bit about why we made the choice to write suspense, and a couple of the ways we go about it. So on my panel today, I am really, really excited to introduce in alpha order, but this is the only time you'll be in alpha order, Diane Fanning. And Diane, we all know, has a shelf of 26 books out so far, 11 mysteries and 15 true crime. We're going to talk about why you made the switch from true crime to mystery and suspense. Diane is a regular on Deadly Women. I have friends all over the country who are excited. Every time you show up, I get an email from them. I saw Diane. She's your friend. So this is going to be great. She is from Baltimore, and now she lives in Bedford, Virginia, and can see the Blue Ridge Mountains from her house. Tara, you're next. I think. Yes. Tara's got a suspense novel out. Her debut novel is called One Night Gone. And it just kind of bombed with only getting an Agatha, a McCavity, and an Anthony Award on her debut novel. Congratulations, Tara. That is a trifecta not to be sneezed at. I am so proud of you on that one. I'm just so excited for you. She's also got short story collections. She's won the Agatha Award and the Thriller Award for short fiction, and also edits the online flash fiction journal, Smoke Long Quarterly. And for those of you who don't know, last but not least, is Tara's husband, Art.
Hi.
And Art is a longtime friend of Suffolk writers group. I met Art here, and then I met him several other places. But Art is a short story writer for the most part, I think. You've got quite a few short stories out, a lot of different collections, Best First Novel Award, Agatha Award for On the Road with Dell and Louise, which is a great title. And his short stories have appeared so many places that I'm not going to read them all, but congratulations, Art. Every time I turn around, there's another one of your short stories. And who's better to have a son named Dashiell? I love it. I just love it. I may have to appropriate that name, but I won't. Okay, so we are here to talk about writing suspense. And I'm going to ask, I'm Betsy Ashton. Sorry. I have 5 books out, 5 collections, short stories and poetry in anthologies, another anthology coming out later this year with Diane. And what are we? Are there 14 of us, 16 of us, Diane?
Somewhere around there.
Right now, the working title is Murder by the Glass, and it is, some of the stuff is going to be so rollickingly fun. I've only read 2. But anyway, I write mysteries, I write suspense, and I'm in the middle of finishing a suspense novel right now. So maybe I'll learn something from this panel. All right, so my first question. We all know how important it is to set the hook. We've got to get our reader caught on page 1. So my question is, do you immediately jump into the conflict, or do you let it build slowly in the first chapter or 2? And we're going to start with Tara.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually have a really hard time with that. And with the One Night Gone in particular, I think one of the things we were working on when my editor was like, when we were doing our final edits on that, was how to kind of get to that conflict sooner, because I like to take my time with my characters and get to know them. And so one of the things that I ended up doing actually with that book was, because it took a little while for us to get to the cold case that, is kind of at the heart of the novel. is I added this short little prologue that was at a different time period and sort of hinted at something like someone missing, like a girl missing, and someone like finding a flyer of that. And then it like ends up flying away into the ocean. But it's only like a page or two. And that was a way to kind of pull the reader into like, okay, there is going to be a mystery here. I promise you. Just give me a little bit of time to like get into it. So that was like one trick that I think I did to kind of to do that, to give myself a little bit of space so that my readers could kind of get to know my characters a little bit, I guess, before the mystery was introduced.
Diane, same question for you. Do you jump right into the conflict or do you let it build a little more slowly?
Well, from my true crime background, I learned that you need to start with the blood. So that's what I tend to do. And every time I have decided to start with something else and build up slowly, I've had an editor tell me cut it out. So yeah, I like to jump right into a very pivotal scene and then move from that, sometimes with looking back, sometimes just moving forward. It just depends on the story.
But you want blood on the first page.
At
Pretty
least
close.
on the second.
I think most people want blood on the first page.
Yeah, we all know the trope. If there's a gun on page 1, it has to shoot someone on page 2. Art, what about you? Slow to build or right into the conflict?
I would be a little of both, and I'll explain that. As some people may know, Bonnie Stevens, BK Stevens, who used to be a regular at Suffolk as well, started a blog called The First Two Pages, and after her death, her family asked me to take it on. So I think a lot about the first 2 pages and how we get people into our stories. Back when Bonnie was running the blog, she invited me to write on one of my stories, Parallel Play, which is about a mother and son who ultimately are in danger. And I was like, oh, absolutely, because I knew I was going to start with this key moment where the tension ratchets up, until I actually looked back at the story and realized it wasn't until 40% into the story that action took place. So almost halfway. But I look back at it and I realized that there was, even in the first section, a lot of tension going on. Patricia Highsmith, in a book that I love, which is about, crafting suspense, and if I could lean down, I could get it and hand it up and show it. But she talks about the idea of lines of action and slow beginnings. And she says that what we want to have, this is about investment in character to some degree, but also we want to have the first foundations of the plot. And if we can see different lines of tension and conflict, and in my story, Parallel Play, that tension is between mother and son. That tension is between mother and other parents in the area, between mother and her husband, the father, who is off on a business trip, between the weather outside. And so all that are little bits of conflict that are just beginning to be laid. And then it's a matter of tightening some of those tensions, those lines of action over the course of time. I do think we've invested in character at the beginning, and that character has some problem, we can move ahead. Now I'm gonna go to Patricia Highsmith again. A story of hers, The Terrapin. Only thing that happens at the beginning is a mom comes home, the elevator opens, and little boy stuffs a book behind a sofa. And yet it's one of the most harrowing stories that I've probably ever read. All starts with just that one little bit of action.
Fantastic. I'm finishing a book now. I've finally gotten through the complete shitty first draft. Thank you, Anne Lamott, for that phrase. And almost 3/4 of the editing, the final edits are in, but I still have 1/4 that's still shitty first draft. But my first chapter sets up what's going to happen and the what if scenario. The question is, what would happen if an airplane crashed during a flyover at a college football game? It happens to be the Army-Navy game. Who crashes? Why? What happened? And who screams out the one and only word of dialogue in that first chapter, which is a name. So that's where I started, and it's about 2.5 pages long. So after that is my 9th take on where to start this story. So it's like, now I think I've got it. I'm not changing it for anybody. Okay, so once we've got the hook set, and it's really important, I think, to remember that suspense has to build. It can't just all be poured out, even though Diane likes blood on page 1 or 2. How do you keep your readers turning pages without tiring them out? Where do you give them that first breath, that first chance to say, okay, I'm ready for the next big scene? And we're going to start with Diane on this one.
I follow my gut. It's like if I'm reading back what I've written and I'm getting exhausted, then I go, okay, it's time to shift to, if your main character is a cop, you shift to his personal life.
Mm-hmm.
Or you shift to interactions with other police officers, and you don't belabor the build of suspense. You take a deep breath. I know sometimes when I'm writing, like particularly a chase scene, which can be very harrowing in any book, you end up, when you finish writing it, if you've gotten into it, you're panting when you get through. You're exhausted. Well, if you're doing that, that is a signal to you that the reader needs to have a chance to get a sip of water. So give it to him. Give him something eccentric about the character, or something that expands the vision of the character and makes him into more of a whole person.
I like that. I like the building of the whole person, not just the person in the plot. And
right.
Even whether it's your true crime or your mysteries, your suspense books, you do give us a lot of real character development that is tangential to plot, but those characters become richer.
Yeah, and particularly I think when you're writing a series, if you want to maintain something over a series, that main character is so important, but so are a lot of the characters around that person. And you can use your breaks in the building of the suspense to highlight those things. And although you've put in hints to some of that deeper character stuff in the suspense, this gives you a chance to really pull them out and pull the reader into that particular person.
Good. Art, how do you break up that breathless breakneck speed to give me a chance to take a deep breath and think?
Yeah, it's, you think about suspense, and suspense is a reader that really wants to know something, and a writer that's ultimately going to tell you, but just not yet, and so it's the horror scene where there's a long hallway and somebody's moving down it, and you're like, please just keep going, and they stop and they look at something. Well, I'm going to go with what Diane said as well about character and plot. Plot, I think of as kind of forward moving, that moves along its horizontal axis, kind of escalating in some way. And character is something that we're going to stop and explore vertically to some degree. And what you've got is this forward movement, but also a little bit of, say, interiority or reflection or a pause, and we're going to slow it down. There's a great scene in A is for Alibi, Sue Grafton's A is for Alibi, where she's going through a dark house. And we know that she's going to find something there, but we got to stop at the bathroom and the closet. And then she's going to stop and think about something she should have done. And then we're going to move ahead a little bit more. And I think it's that balance of give a little bit of information, a little bit of character, move ahead, and the reader is going to keep pacing ahead with you. So
that's good. Tara, what about you?
So I agree with everything y'all have said, but I think another technique that writers can use, which I exploit a lot, is changing character point of view. So, you've got
my notes. You
got this thing going, and then, it's like, okay, we're going to stop. We're going to take a breather with you. We're going to move on to someone else. I have not yet written a novel from just one person's point of view. I don't know if I could do it because it's so hard to maintain that voice and also the action of what's going on. And so a cheater way for me is like, all right, let's try someone new now. So that's another way I think to give readers a break, to introduce a new character, introduce a new point of view, a new plot line, and all of that. So that's another technique I think that writers can use to do that.
Well, unlike you, I've written my first 4 books from first person singular.
It's hard.
It
is hard.
is, because you've always got to look at the binoculars and say, wait a minute, that's over here. I can't see what's over here. So don't show me what's over here. Just show me what I can see. My current book is close third, but because it's a suspense, I can do a little bit more with changing points of view. And I think that is really critical. There's a comment here. I'm going to stop for a second. I've had people stress that the opening line should be used to draw the reader in. How important is the opening line to you, and how should it be used? Oh, that is a great question. Is it just the first line that's going to draw the reader in, or is it a little bit longer if it's the first chapter? Tara, do you want to take that one first?
Art and I talked about, we did a sort of suspense workshop. When was that? Or like a few months ago?
Time is weird these days. It could have been years. I don't know.
And we talked specifically about a couple of books that, it's about the opening and that opening line. And I think I used Shirley Jackson, The House on Haunting Hill. Yes. And that first paragraph and the way it works. And we talk about like action and blood on the first page, but if you read that first paragraph, it's all description of a house. I mean, like everything they tell you not to do, and yet it is so creepy and suspenseful and awesome. So I love the opening lines. Like I try not to obsess over my opening lines, because if I do that, then I'll just like never move beyond. But I love like a good opening line. Yes, absolutely. I think it's important. I don't know if it's like, the end all be all if you don't have the most amazing line ever, but I do think if you can get a really awesome one, yes, definitely.
That's wonderful. Diane, what about you? Do you obsess over your opening line?
I think the first paragraph is what really matters. And I think the most important thing for the first paragraph to do is to put a question in the reader's mind. And it doesn't matter what you're writing. I mean, you could be writing about some exotic fruit that's gone extinct, and you can say, you describe the juiciness and the flavor of it and say, but you will never be able to taste it. And suddenly they're going, well, why? And that's because it's extinct, but they could go into that article. And so I think the first paragraph of just about any kind of writing needs to bring up a question so that there's going to be something to make the reader want to go past that first paragraph, a question that they want answers to.
Art, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, a good opening line, obviously you want to catch a reader's attention. I don't know that it necessarily has to be that and I agree with what Diane said about getting a question in a reader's mind in that first paragraph, getting them something that's going to carry them forward. But I also think that it could be, a word or a phrase or something that just, I don't want to use the word startle, but that catches the attention somehow, brings them in kind of quickly, and then we can start developing character and plot and getting those questions and all asked. So I do tend to work a little bit on that opening line quite a bit, particularly in a short story. Economy and efficiency is key to that. So you've got a shorter space, and I saw a question about that in the chat as well. It definitely is. I think that you got to get it going pretty quickly. Now I say that having said, slow beginnings are fine, but still you got to get tension going, got to get the reader's attention and move it ahead.
A slow beginning. I'm sorry, go ahead, Diane.
Art, when you set it up so that you have a startled moment because of a word or a phrase, you are raising a question. They're going, what? So and just a simple question like what is enough. You just need that question.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think we're talking about is with suspense is it's all about curiosity, right? It's all about like making the reader curious, wanting to read more, wanting to figure out what's going on with this person or the situation or whatever. So really it's all about just making someone curious because they have a million other things going on in their lives and you want them to read your book, right?
Well, in my first chapter, I used the rule of 3. I set it at a joyous event, the Army-Navy game. It's a football game. Everyone's there to have fun. The crowd is into it. The planes are coming over. First, the Army, they're not Rangers. What are they? Helicopters. Blackhawks do the flyover. 6 of them flapping their way across. Like 20 minutes for the flyover for the helicopters. And then come the Navy jet fighters. It's one of those that crashes. So I've got everything set up. It's beautiful. Everyone's having a good time. The excitement is building. The plane crashes and people die. And that's the hook for me. It's like, bang, 2 things good, 1 thing unexpected. And we'll see if readers kind of like it. If they don't, well, I'm in trouble. I find with suspense, I have to do a little bit more pre-thinking before I start writing. I generally am a character-driven writer. I like to take my characters, drop them into a scene and stand back and see what comes out of it. So therefore, I'm a pantser. I write from the seat of my pants, but not when I write suspense. I really, really can't do that. I have to plot this out. I have to have, it's been called a book Bible. I use a shot index where every chapter is a line in literally an old-fashioned spreadsheet. Who's in it? What's the time frame? What's the movement? Why is this character here? What happens next? And if I don't do that, then I'm lost. I've just got this mashup. Who is a pantser in here when they write suspense? Anybody?
Me?
I think
No.
I am.
I am too, but to some degree, yeah.
How much of a degree, Diane?
I tend to sometimes write my outline as I'm writing my book. So my outline is what I've just written. That's how I do it. But then I'll get to a point where I'm losing track of my threads. Mm-hmm. So I'll sit down and I'll jot down what's going to happen in the next 20 pages. Mm-hmm. You know, this has to happen, this has to happen, this has to happen. And I go through my checklist. So it's kind of an informal outline as I go along, only done in small clumps. Mm-hmm. Once when I was in high school, I did a term paper and my teacher figured out that I had done when the outline was due, I'd already done the paper. And I turned in the outline and she said, next time, please promise me you won't do that. You'll do the outline when it's due and then do the paper. Well, I did the next time. And she said, don't ever do that again. I'm not even going to count the grade on this. You're not made for outlining. And I've taken that seriously the rest of my life.
Yeah, I actually, so for my first novel, I did not outline it at all. I just started writing it and was like, well, let's see what happens. It wasn't on deadline, you know, I was just writing this book, whatever. And then about halfway through, I realized I probably need to figure out what the heck I'm doing here. And so then I started outlining it and kind of figured out some backstory and like what was going to happen and changed who the bad person was or whatever. So then for my second book, which I was on deadline for, I thought, okay, well, now I'm going to outline this whole thing and I'm going to have all these twists done and I'm going to have everything figured out and mapped. And I'm just going to go by that roadmap and it's going to be so much easier, right? And then I ended up throwing away that entire novel. I wrote 70,000 words and then ended up throwing it out because it just did not work. And I had probably figured out, like I'd probably had warning signs of that as I was writing it, but I was so convinced that I had like figured out all of these things that I was going to keep going. And so now I think that I am much more of a pants. Well, what is it when it's like both of them together is like
hybrid
answer, whatever it is. With kind of like what you were,
I don't know.
planter, right? Kind of like what you were talking about, Diane, where it's like, I need to know at least the next 5 chapters, maybe, you know, like the next couple beats ahead. And then I'll write to that and kind of see what happens and then reevaluate. So I think that's probably where I am, but who knows? I have no idea. I think every book is different too. So
Yeah.
I had trouble getting into the current book because I didn't have a good enough grip on the female character, and she is the lead. And I've always been able to grab my female lead and go bang right into her. I could not get into her right away. So it was a little bit more difficult. That's why my first chapter was rewritten 9 times. Art, plotter or pantser, or wait a minute, Alan called it a plotzer.
Plotzer, yeah, plotzer or pantser.
Plotzer.
You know, I tend to, if I get an idea for a story, I'm going to tend to write a little bit of it, kind of sketch it out. And then a lot of what happens goes on in my head. I wouldn't call it necessarily like outlining and planning, but just kind of thinking about it and then letting it develop and then getting it down on the page and then moving ahead a little bit. So I'm kind of a slow writer, but a lot of it does take place just trying to figure out things bit by bit, flesh things out. Another difference is I don't always start writing at the beginning of a story. I know people that write, just start writing and go linear, but I'll think of a scene and then sort of build either up to it or away from it and around it. And so it's a messy process. But you know, at the end of it, in the revision stage, that's where a lot of the organization comes, where I do have to sit down and think like, how does this piece earn its place in the final, and what needs to go, what can be cut. And so I'm more likely to write long and then just start trimming back.
Yeah, I enjoy the editing almost as much as I enjoy the initial, you know, putting everything down on a page, whether it belongs or not. Art brought up an interesting thought, and that is about characters. Suspense novels often, not always, but often have a lot of characters. Some are not named and some are just given to a police officer or whatever. How do you feel about naming a lot of characters that may, how do you feel about naming characters that may only reach 2 or 3 chapters and are used to propel the storyline along and then are never seen again? Do you give them names or do you just give them types? And
it depends on how they interact with the main character.
Okay.
So if they are like the mother to the main character, obviously they have to have some sort of name. If they're just the person behind the soda jerk counter who fixes her a soda, why does he need a name? You know, it may be important that she gets that soda at that time to make the plot go forward, but he may be irrelevant. He may be just a mechanism to deliver the soda.
Very
I
good.
agree with that. Yeah. And I think a lot of time, like sometimes you don't quite know if a character you introduce is going to be a more major, you know, person, or it's just going to be like a mention, you know. So like the book I'm working on right now, it's like moms in this neighborhood and they're all like very involved in the high school community, like as the parent teacher people. And so like they interact with like a ton of parents, and I feel like they have to name them when they come across them, because it's like, you know, here's Susie Johnson again with the bake sale, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it's like in her head, because it's first person. And in her head, that's how she would refer to that person, you know? So I feel like I have to name all of these people. I'm like looking on my shelves, like, what's a good last name for this person?
Yeah, I often look at regional last names to figure out what I want to call someone. And do I want it to be a long last name or a short last name, depending on how much I have to type? I'm crazy.
I like how the name sounds in my mouth or it sounds to my ear. And I judge a lot of character names on that.
Good point. What about you, Art?
Yeah, you know, as primarily a short story writer, more limited cast of characters, and so people really need to earn their place on there. If it's there are characters that don't get names because they serve a purpose, as Diane said. But mostly I'm focusing on a pretty tight cast of characters, and they all need to earn some weight there, in which case they get named. I have been tinkering on and off for a while now with this idea of a boarding school novel. Well, needless to say, if you're in a school setting, you've got a ton of characters, and then it's a question not just of who's going to get named, because there may be many names going around, but how are you going to make sure that the names that are important stand out? I'm struggling with that. So we'll see. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Kill them off.
Victim or suspect. They're the ones that are going to get the ones that get the attention.
Indeed. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm curious if y'all, do you ever name your characters off after like your friends or family or people that you know?
I ran a contest through my blog, and I auctioned off 6 character names, and they all went into the book, and they all were given credit in the acknowledgments.
That's fun.
And I had so many friends go, "Oh my God, that was my father's name, and from the time I nominated him to the time the book came out, he died. I have something of him in my hand." I was like, "Oh my God!" But yeah, I've auctioned off character names. I think it's fun. It's more involvement with the reader, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah. I've never used a person's name in a book except for our son Dash. I used it in On the Road with Del and Louise, as they're thinking about potential baby names for some future child, and it was in the list there. I did appear though. I've been named in 2 books. Margaret Maron named me in the book Sand Sharks. Then Toni Kellner put me as an alias for Sid in one of her books. So flipping the tables there a little bit.
I used an old boss that I didn't like, and I thought he was a bit of an SOB. So when I wrote a book, I had this character who habitually lifted the tip off the table after someone left it. And so he carried that guy's name.
That's awesome.
That's good. I really do like that. That's a good one. Especially if you've got someone who is just like, I don't know. I had Stressed Out Steve and as one, and Evil Twin Skippy was a boss. So I worked for both of them, and Evil Twin Skippy I have killed off several times because he was nice one minute, next minute he was Evil Twin Skippy. What would you not write about? What topic would you steer so far away from you can never see putting it in a story? And why?
That's a good question.
2 things I'm uncomfortable with, and I say I wouldn't write about them, but darn, I find myself, sometimes getting into places where I have to. But right now, for me, it is animal cruelty and pedophilia.
Yeah, those would be tough ones to write about. Yeah, I could see that. And, whenever, right after our son was born, I remember reading several short stories that dealt with, to some degree, implicitly more than explicitly, with child abuse or children endangered and stuff like that. And I just couldn't read those for a while. And if I couldn't read it, it seemed like I couldn't write about it. And yet soon after that, the story I mentioned before about Parallel Play is one that does have a child in danger. And it was a while after that I did come back to it. But for that, it was a matter of kind of exploring and confronting fears, like really, really some awful things there, and trying to figure out how to deal with it. So I'd hate to take anything entirely off the table, though Diane hit 2 things that might be off my table, at least for now.
Yeah, I used to say it was the murder of a child, but then the publisher wanted me to write about the Casey Anthony case, and that sort of went out the window. I did what I was asked, and I got past it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know that I'd say there was something I've never read about. I'm a big horror movie fan, and what Art was saying, about when after Dash was born definitely changed my taste of horror. I cannot do home invasion stuff. Like I can't watch it or read it. Like it just, there's something about it that like, nope, So I don't think I would ever really write about that, especially novel length. I write a lot of really short fiction, and I can do dark, creepy things in short fiction where I don't have to spend a ton of time with somebody, you know, in that subject. So I feel like I could do some darker things short, but as far as a novel, when I'm spending a year writing something, I want to like my characters. I want to have something there that I want to return to. And so I feel like if it was too disturbing, I wouldn't want to do it.
I would not write about politics.
Oh. That is definitely something I avoid as well, mentioning.
I will write about social issues, but I try to take a more of a, I don't want to say moral stance, but more of a moral stance than a political stance. Because no matter what, there's going to be 70 million people that don't like me, no matter what side of the equation I'm on. So I try to stay totally away from that, even no matter what.
It's interesting. Somebody just commented about the pandemic, which is, I think, something a lot of us are struggling with right now. Like, do we set our books during the pandemic? Do we ignore it as though it does not exist? Do we write it afterwards? And what does that look like? I think that's all really interesting to think about as well. Are all books going to be set in 2019?
Oh, please. Oh, please. I'm lucky because the one I've been living with for a couple of years is actually set in 2007. Starts in 2007 and then goes backwards and then forwards. So I don't have to deal with that. I just have to deal with the right technology, which is changing on a minute-to-minute basis. Someone said, why isn't he reading on his iPad? I said, because it's 2008. They didn't have them. They had e-readers. They were called Nooks. It's like, but I agree. There's a whole thread in here about the pandemic, and I have collected pandemic literature for a very long time, and I've read it for a very long time. I still don't think I'm ready to go back and reread The Stand, but I might be. Who knows? Since that is pandemic literature. But I think we're all probably pretty burned out about that. So that brings up a question. How did you manage writing during the pandemic? I have writers who couldn't write a word for the first six or 8 weeks. Did any of you fall into the I don't even want to put a word on paper trap?
It was yeah, I've heard from writers who said that they found it great therapy to be able to escape into, their writing and into the world that they're creating on the page as opposed to the one they were living in. I had trouble writing, and part of that was because I've seen this breakdown a little bit. People who are like, well, I'm a writer, I'm naturally, introspective and solitary. And so I was home, I was doing things. But I've seen a line between writers who have day jobs and kids, and who is really a time thing. So as much as it might have been really good for me to dive into writing, Tara and I didn't always have a lot of spare time for doing that. That said, I still found myself being fairly productive as the year wore on, particularly toward the end of the year. And so it took a while to get there.
I, particularly at the beginning, was extremely unproductive because I could not focus. It seemed like there was so much real world crowding in on me. Focus became impossible, worried about family members and the situation and everything was going on. I really had a hard time. And I feel like when I was productive, I was moving at a slower pace than normal. I mean, I did finish a book during this time, and I have started 2 others, but I still don't feel my productivity energy was at the same level as it was before the pandemic.
Yep,
I think
I
it
agree
drained a
with that.
lot of us. Go ahead, Tara.
No, I was gonna say I agree with that. That's exactly how I felt too. And I was, on deadline. It was my second novel, and so I felt like this intense pressure, which didn't help with creativity, and then all of this other stuff going on. Really hard, very tough. So I did it, but I can't say that it was fun, and I can't say that I don't know, like I didn't feel like I was writing a book. I felt like I was a writer who had to get words out at some, I don't know how, I don't know if that's a right way to explain it, but it didn't feel like I was being creative and inventive. It felt like I was doing a job, which I know to some degree we all are, but it's, you want that piece of it as well. So it was hard.
I think I personally thought, oh, well, if I can't go anywhere, that's okay. I've, been writing in a home office for years. I retired several years ago, so this is going to be just wonderful. And I sat there like this, looking at the screen. Where do I go next? Maybe I'll go over and look at social media. Oh, that's not any better. Maybe I'll do this. So it was really quite difficult. Yeah, it did feel more like a chore. So if anyone monitoring Q&A, nope, there are no open questions in Q&A. And I'm monitoring the questions that come in. We have about 9 minutes left. I have 2 more to go. And then actually I have 3 and they're all short. Where do you write physically? And what tools do you use to write? Diane's giggling because she knows I know her answer.
Well, I kind of write everywhere. And my preference for my first draft is legal pad and pencil. And so, I mean, wherever, if I feel like I'm having trouble writing, sitting in my office, I'll go sit at the kitchen table. I'll go sit on the porch. I'll go rock in a rocking chair. I'll just write whenever, on whatever. And like if I'm in a place where I don't have my pencil, my legal pad, I'll pick up used envelopes. I'll do it anywhere with anything. I've even written a scene in crayon when I was babysitting my grandson. So, it's just about anything can be done if you give yourself the freedom to do it any old way.
I can't write longhand, so I just type everything. But I do have to write my novel drafts in Scrivener, the software for writers. That's a great tool, and I don't think I could write just in Word if I was writing something long. So, shout out to Scrivener! Woo!
Yay, Scrivener!
Have you ever tried, Tara, just sitting down and writing a scene and just letting the world disappear around you, getting lost in that pencil?
I can't write fast enough to catch with my thoughts. The one thing that I have been doing lately is walking around the neighborhood and like recording notes to myself through my phone. And I get home and I'm like, this is a mess. But there's something about the walk, that sort of generates your brain in a different way. And I feel like I get all these ideas about scenes or character descriptions or something. And if I don't say them to myself, I forget them all by the time I get home. So that is one way that I've been doing it a little bit differently, but it's not quite the same.
That kind of harkens back to the earlier question, which is, coping during the pandemic. And yet, yes, I usually live a solitary life. I spend most of my time at home writing. I don't have any kids at home anymore, but there's something missing. And I think that just the casual social interactions, when you just walk out and run into somebody or start a conversation with a stranger, I think that feeds a creative impulse in some way that we have to do without in this past year.
Absolutely.
As far as where I write, you're seeing it. This is my office. That is where I write, and the computer I'm on is what I write on. So, and I use Scrivener as well. I do keep a notepad with me though, and I take a lot of notes extensively. So if I'm out and about or wake up in the morning or late night, I've got it nearby so I can take notes. So
good. Another question that came in: are all of us still in critique groups?
Yes,
Who's in it? You are.
Meet
okay.
regularly, and feedback is really important always.
Are you in the same one, Tara, or a different one?
We have a same one with another friend of ours from graduate school, and then Art also has a separate rating group that he meets with. And then I also have several like beta readers that we don't meet or anything, and some of them aren't even writers, but they're people that I can bounce ideas off of or send rating to, and they are awesome people. So
Diane?
I have never been part of a critique group, and I think it is because when I was first starting out, I had some established writers tell me some critique group nightmares, and it scared me away. And I've never set my foot in one before since I was told all that.
I'm in 4.
Yeah.
I work in 2 very small one-on-one with another writer I've been working with for 5 years. We've gone through 4 books together between the 2 of us. The second one is there are 4 writers in that group. And I've seen incredible growth for all of us. And then 2 others are just chapters of the Virginia Writers Club, and I'm active in both of those. So I get a ton of feedback. I really do. We have about 4 minutes to go. I'm going to hold one last question. There is one that came in. Do you try to come full circle from the beginning to the conclusion in your stories? I'll answer that one for me. Absolutely. If I've dropped the line, a reader is going to tell me whatever happened to that, it was not supposed to be a red herring. Well, I forgot.
Yeah, I try to pick up all the breadcrumbs. But I never think of it as full circle because I don't want to end up in the same place I took off.
That's a good tying up threads, but not ending up in the same place is, I think, a very good answer.
I'm going to take it in a different direction in terms of short stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think that some of the best short stories I know, it's not full circle that you come in the same place you were in the beginning, but instead that somehow the ending resonates with the beginning. There's some sort of symmetry to it. And that's harder to explain, more complex than we have in 2 minutes. But that's one of the things that I try to aim for.
So we have 2 minutes left. Thank you, Katie, for keeping me honest, because I would run over. What is the title of your next book? What's coming out? Is it this year or is it next year? What's the title of your next book?
Mine is called.
Tara.
Oh, sorry.
No, Tara. Sorry.
Mine's called The Mother Next Door, and it's coming out on October 12th.
Wow. I like
Sounds menacing.
Yeah, it does. I just had a chill. Oh my God. I'm seeing The Bad Seed. A movie my mother went to without me when I was a little girl, and she didn't sleep with the lights off for about a month. Art, what's your next pub?
I've got a couple of short stories that I'm still trying to get placed and should be coming out this year. Just speaking of pandemic, my book, The Boy Detective and the Summer of '74, still feels new to me. It came out 1 year ago, pre-pandemic. That's what I've got. However, Lee Child and Laurie King did invite me to write the essay on the short mystery for How to Write a Mystery, which is coming out April 27th. Great craft book there for anybody that's interested in it. I'm still reading through it myself, but I would recommend that, and I'm glad to be there myself.
Is that on pre-order?
On pre-order, indeed.
Diane?
Oh, well, the next publication I have is a short story in Murder by the Glass, which I believe is coming out in July. I'm waiting for placement of my working title book, Death Wish. And it's fiction.
And several people have asked what's the name of the book I've referenced a couple of times. It is called Betrayal, and it is the right chapter name or title because it's betrayal on many, many different levels, not just one. I thank all of you for being here. This has been an entertaining panel for me. I learned a lot. And yes, Murder by the Glass, thank you, Maggie, is it's going to be fabulous. We are all excited about this. This follows our 50 Shades of Cabernet. So it's going to be fun. Thank you all for coming. We will see you at the bookstores.
Thank you.
All right.